Mark Green, my new boss, decided he didn't need me or my role in the company. He didn't understand the importance of the role I played, and that the 15 years experience in the company meant I played a pivotal role in the back-end processing and management. He laughed loudly at my business card and terminated me in front of the 10 people who were there to do due diligence for the acquisition. But I should start from the beginning. My name is Mandy. I'm 45 years old. Until that Tuesday morning, I had dedicated 15 years of my life to building Nexus Technologies from a struggling startup operating out of a converted garage into a cybersecurity platform valued at $1 million. I wasn't the face of the company. I wasn't the one giving TED Talks or attending shareholder meetings. I was the infrastructure, the foundation nobody sees but everyone depends on. I designed the encryption protocols that kept our client data secure when competitors were hemorrhaging information to hackers. I built the redundancy systems that kept us operational during the worst cyber attack our industry had ever witnessed. When our data center in Virginia caught fire at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was the one coordinating the failover, while everyone else was still trying to understand what a failover even meant. I negotiated contracts with vendors who could have crushed us with a single price increase. I created the compliance framework that let us expand into European markets without triggering regulatory nightmares. I documented every process, every decision tree, every single point of failure in systems so complex that even our own engineers sometimes got lost in them. Then our CEO, Arthur Whitmore, decided to retire. No succession plan, no gradual transition, just an announcement at the quarterly meeting and an empty office the following Monday. The board scrambled. They needed someone fast, someone with the Whitmore name recognition, someone who could reassure investors that continuity was guaranteed. Mark Green, 30 years old, Arthur's nephew, who graduated from a business program more famous for its alumni donations than its actual curriculum, took over. His LinkedIn profile was a masterclass in vague corporate speak, passionate about synergy, believer in disruptive innovation, focused on vertical integration across horizontal platforms. His first week, he called a town hall and announced that Nexus was entering a new era. "We're going to strip away the redundancy," he declared, "and unleash our true potential." People applauded. I took notes. Within days, the pattern emerged. Project managers stopped going to Mark for decisions. They came to me. Legal questions bypassed his office entirely. Finance needed approvals. They found me in the server room or the supply closet I'd converted into a secondary workspace because my actual office had been reassigned to Mark's innovation consultant. I didn't complain. I fixed what broke. I answered what was asked. I stayed until the cleaning crew left, then stayed longer. When you've been in the trenches of a company long enough, you develop an instinct. You feel the tremors before the earthquake. You can smell smoke before anyone sees flames. And when Horizon Investments began their acquisition due diligence, I knew exactly how this story would end. Mark just hadn't read that far ahead yet. What happened next was the moment everything quietly, irreversibly shifted. The change didn't announce itself. There was no memo, no restructuring chart, no department-wide email. Mark simply stopped including me. Strategy sessions became leadership only. Client calls turned into executive discussions. When people asked where I was, he'd wave dismissively and say, "Mandy is more tactical than strategic. She's fantastic at keeping the trains running, but we need people who can reimagine the tracks." I heard that line 4 times before I stopped counting. Here's what Mark didn't understand. Being underestimated is sometimes more valuable than being respected. When people think you're just the person who fixes their printer problems, they stop watching what you're actually doing. They stop guarding their conversations. They forget that the person who built the system probably left themselves a few back doors. Not the illegal kind, the documented kind, the kind buried in technical specifications and compliance requirements that nobody reads until something catastrophic happens. I kept working. I kept my head down, my documentation meticulous, my responses to questions brief and factual. When Mark made decisions that contradicted established protocols, I logged them. When he overrode safety measures that had taken years to implement, I archived the email chains. When he promised clients features that our infrastructure couldn't support, I made sure the technical limitations were clearly stated in writing with timestamps. Horizon Investments' due diligence team arrived like auditors always do, polite, thorough, and quietly skeptical. They asked intelligent questions. They wanted to see behind the curtain, beyond the glossy presentations and revenue projections. They wanted to understand what actually made Nexus function. Mark met with them daily. He brought slide decks and confidence. He talked about market positioning and growth trajectories. He used the word synergy too often. I received different kinds of questions. They came through back channels at first. A junior analyst would email asking about system architecture. A compliance officer would request documentation about our security certifications. I responded with facts, just facts. No opinions, no commentary, no finger-pointing. Then Sarah Hale, Horizon's chief technical officer, asked to meet. The subject line was simple: Operational Reality Check. I stared at that invite for probably too long because I understood what it meant. When the technical people go around leadership to talk to the actual builders, it means they've already found cracks in the foundation. They're not investigating anymore, they're confirming. The meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes. Sarah didn't waste time on pleasantries. She opened her laptop, pulled up a document, and turned the screen toward me. "Walk me through this," she said. It was one of Mark's infrastructure proposals, the one where he suggested consolidating our server architecture to reduce redundancy and improve efficiency. In non-technical terms, he wanted to remove the backup systems that had saved us during the Virginia fire. "That would be catastrophic," I said calmly. "We'd have a single point of failure across our entire client base." "That's what I thought," Sarah replied. But Mark assured us this was industry standard. "It's standard for companies that don't mind going offline for 3 days during a crisis." Sarah made a note. "And the compliance framework changes he proposed?" "Which ones?" She listed 5 initiatives. I explained why each one would either violate federal regulations or contradict contractual obligations with our largest clients. I didn't editorialize. I just connected the dots between Mark's ideas and their inevitable consequences. At the end of our 30-minute meeting, which had stretched to an hour, Sarah closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "How much of this company actually runs through you?" I chose my words carefully. "I built most of the critical systems. I maintain relationships with key vendors. I hold the documentation for processes that aren't written anywhere else." "Why isn't this documented?" "It is. Mark just hasn't read those documents." Sarah's expression didn't change, but I saw something shift behind her eyes. "We'll likely have follow-up questions. I'll make myself available." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the lines of code on my screen, thinking about what comes next when the people with the money start asking the right questions to the right people. 3 days later, an email appeared in my inbox late at night. No subject line, no body text, just an attachment labeled transition_plan_draft. The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the domain belonged to Horizon Investments. Someone had sent me something I wasn't supposed to see. Either it was a mistake, or it was a very deliberate test. I almost deleted it. Almost. But 15 years of reading technical documentation had taught me that the most important information is usually buried in the files people think nobody will read. I opened it. The document was exactly what the file name suggested, an internal draft of Horizon's post-acquisition transition plan. It was full of bracketed placeholders, track changes, and marginal notes in different colors, the kind of working document that exists before decisions become official announcements. I scrolled slowly, taking in the organizational charts, the role definitions, the integration timeline. Then I found the section that made my pulse spike: Critical Personnel Retention and Authority Structure. Under it, a subsection, Operational Continuity Officer. Next to it, TBD, Requires Board Approval. I saved the file to an external drive I maintained separately from company systems. I labeled it reference_materials_2025. Not leverage, just reference. Once you start thinking of documents as weapons, you've already crossed a line you can't uncross. The next morning, Mark pushed through another optimization initiative. This time, he decided to renegotiate our primary vendor contract without consulting legal or finance. He sent an email to our infrastructure provider demanding a 30% cost reduction, citing market standards that didn't exist. The vendor called me directly. "What's going on, Mandy? This email doesn't sound like you." "It's not from me," I replied carefully. "I'd recommend you wait a few days, hours before responding." "Should we be worried about the contract?" "No. About the transition? Let me get back to you." I forwarded the entire email chain to a generic compliance inbox that I knew Horizon was monitoring. No commentary, no accusations, just the thread with a simple note. FYI, vendor relationships may require stabilization during transition period. 12 hours later, Sarah called me. "Did you approve that vendor renegotiation?" "No, I wasn't consulted." "Do you know what the impact would be if they terminated the contract?" "We'd lose access to 45% of our server infrastructure within a month. Client data would need to be migrated under emergency protocols. Cost would be approximately 8 times whatever Mark thinks he'd save." There was a long pause. "Can you document that analysis?" "Already done. I'll send it now." After that conversation, something shifted in how Horizon communicated with me. Questions stopped coming through official channels. They started arriving in my personal email, my phone, sometimes through encrypted messaging apps. They weren't asking me to explain Mark's decisions anymore. They were asking me what should happen instead. Draft org charts arrived with my name already penciled into key positions. Risk assessments included phrases like, "per Mandy's technical review," and "contingent on Mandy's authorization." Legal memos referenced operational continuity requirements that seemed to have been designed specifically around my role, even though nobody had officially offered me anything yet. Meanwhile, Mark was celebrating what he called momentum. He brought in external consultants who had never worked in cybersecurity. He announced a company rebrand that would cost $1.5 million and accomplish nothing. He told the engineering team that they needed to think bigger and move faster, which is corporate speak for, "I don't understand what you do, but I need you to do it differently." One of those engineers, a woman named Amelia, who'd been with Nexus for 10 years, stopped by my desk late one evening. "Are we going to survive this?" she asked quietly. "The company is... some of the decisions..." "No," I said. "Is Horizon going to clean house?" I looked at her directly. "They're going to stabilize things. That's all I can say right now." She nodded and left, but I could see the relief in her shoulders. That night, another document arrived in my inbox. Same mysterious sender. This one was labeled transition_plan_final. I opened it already knowing what I'd find. The placeholder was gone. In its place, Operational Continuity Officer, Mandy. No brackets, no question marks, Just my name typed cleanly into the official structure of whatever came next. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, because once your name appears in documents like that, there's no such thing as neutral territory anymore. You're not an observer. You're a participant, whether you asked for it or not. Mark called an emergency leadership meeting for Monday morning. The invite went to 6 people. I wasn't one of them. That wasn't new. What was new was the follow-up email I received 20 minutes after the meeting started. It came from Horizon's legal team, marked urgent. Mandy, we understand personnel changes are being discussed this morning. Please confirm whether operational continuity approval has been granted for these changes. I read that sentence 3 times. Operational continuity approval. That phrase appeared nowhere in Nexus's existing corporate structure. It appeared nowhere in Mark's understanding of how the company worked. But it appeared 15 times in the document that had been quietly circulating among Horizon's leadership team. The document that outlined how post-acquisition decisions would be made. The document that gave someone specific contractual authority to override executive decisions that threaten system stability. I replied with 4 words. No approval has been granted. Within 30 minutes, Mark's proposed changes were suspended pending review. No explanation, no announcement, just a terse email from Horizon stating that all personnel decisions were frozen until further notice. Mark didn't understand what had happened, but he knew something had happened. He started watching me differently. Not with hostility exactly, more like confusion, like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't remember starting. He stopped by my workspace that afternoon, leaning against the door frame in a way that was probably meant to seem casual. Horizon seems to value your input, he said. They ask questions. I answer them. Right. He paused. Just make sure we're presenting a unified front. I'd hate for them to get the wrong impression about our leadership structure. Unified front. Leadership structure. More corporate phrases that sound collaborative until you hear them enough times to recognize them as warnings. I always represent things accurately, I told him, to recognize them as warnings. I always represent things accurately, I told him. He smiled, but it looked like something he'd learned from a book about body language. Good. We're on the same team here. He left, but I could feel the tension lingering in the air like pressure before a storm. The real test came 3 days later. Mark decided he needed to right-size the organization before the acquisition closed. He drafted a restructuring plan that eliminated 15 positions, including 3 people who had been with Nexus since the beginning. People who knew where all the undocumented processes lived, people whose institutional knowledge couldn't be replaced by hiring someone with a fresher resume. He submitted the plan to Horizon's transition team without telling me. Sarah called within minutes. Did you review this restructuring proposal? No. Do you approve it? I pulled up the list of names, felt my stomach tighten. No. This would eliminate critical operational knowledge. We'd be flying blind in at least 4 major system areas. Can you document that? Give me a few hours. I spent that time writing the most important document of my career. Not about Mark's incompetence, not about his inexperience, just about what happens when you remove the people who actually understand how things work. I listed every system dependency, every knowledge gap that would open, every single point where we'd be vulnerable during the transition. I sent it to Sarah with copies to Horizon's entire transition committee. By end of day, the restructuring was canceled, not delayed. Canceled, accompanied by a new memo from Horizon stating that all organizational changes must be approved by operational continuity leadership. Mark stormed into my office for the first time since he'd taken over. "You're blocking me," he said flatly. I looked up from my monitor. I'm protecting the infrastructure. That's not your job anymore. Actually, I said carefully, according to the acquisition agreement, it is. He stared at me. What are you talking about? Section 10, subsection C. All operational decisions during the transition period must be cleared through designated continuity leadership. I'm the CEO. You're the interim CEO of a company being acquired. There's a difference. His face went through several colors. This is insubordination. This is contract compliance. He left without another word, but I could hear him on his phone in the hallway, his voice rising as he tried to get someone at Horizon to overrule what I just told him. Nobody called me that evening to contradict anything. That night, I received one final message from the mysterious sender. Final transition meeting scheduled for Thursday, 9 a.m. Bring business cards. Sarah Hale. She'd been the one sending me the documents all along. Not to test me, to prepare me. I looked at the box of business cards sitting in my desk drawer. They were outdated and irrelevant. Sometimes the most powerful move is showing people exactly how much has changed while they weren't paying attention. Thursday morning arrived with unusual weather. A dense fog that made the office building look like it was floating in empty space. I arrived an hour early, not because I was nervous, but because old habits persist even when everything else is changing. Mark was already there, of course. New suit, expensive watch, the kind of grooming that suggested he'd been awake since 5 a.m., preparing for whatever he thought was about to happen. He nodded at me as I walked past. I nodded back, professional, cordial, neither of us acknowledging that one of our careers was about to end. Horizon's team arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. Sarah came first, followed by their CFO, 2 legal counsel, and finally William Reeves, Horizon's COO. The kind of man who didn't need to announce his authority because everyone in the room already felt it the moment he entered. Mark stood to greet him, hand extended, smile confident. William, good to see you again. I think you'll be pleased with the transition progress we've made. William shook his hand briefly and took a seat at the head of the table. Let's review where we are. Mark launched into his presentation. Slides about integration milestones and cultural alignment, charts showing projected efficiencies, quotes from leadership books about change management. His section on team optimization included the names of people he still wanted to remove, phrased carefully as role clarification and structural refinement. My name appeared once in a section titled Transitioning Support Functions. The subtitle read, Legacy Operational Roles to be Absorbed into Broader Management Structure. I didn't react. I'd seen the slide deck that morning when he'd accidentally sent it to the entire leadership team instead of just his inner circle. Another small mistake in a pattern of small mistakes. When Mark finished, William didn't respond immediately. He looked at Sarah, who opened a thick folder and placed it in the center of the table. Before we proceed, Sarah said, we need to address the operational continuity framework. Mark frowned slightly. I'm not familiar with that term. It's outlined in Section 12 of the acquisition agreement, William said. The section your counsel should have reviewed with you. I read the agreement, Mark replied, though his tone suggested he was suddenly less certain about that. Sarah pulled out a specific page marked with yellow highlighter. This section establishes that during the transition period, all decisions affecting system stability, personnel with critical knowledge, or operational infrastructure must be approved by the designated continuity authority. Mark shifted in his seat. Right. I understand the concept of stability, but obviously as CEO, that authority would rest with me. That would be the case, William said, if we hadn't identified significant operational risks during our due diligence. The room got quieter. Sarah continued, her voice neutral. Over the past 3 months, we've documented 15 instances where executive decisions directly contradicted technical requirements, 5 cases where vendor relationships were jeopardized by unauthorized renegotiations, and 3 separate occasions where system changes were implemented without proper safety protocols. Mark's confidence flickered. Those were efficiency initiatives, part of modernizing the infrastructure. They were risks, Sarah corrected, and they required intervention by operational leadership to prevent client impact. Operational leadership, Mark repeated slowly. You mean my team? No, William said. We mean Mandy. Every eye in the room turned to me. I kept my expression neutral, my hands folded on the table in front of me. Mark looked between William and Sarah like he was waiting for someone to explain the joke. I don't understand. Then let me clarify, William said. He nodded to Sarah, who slid a document across the table. Not to Mark, to me. I knew what it was before I touched it. The contract I'd been copied on, but never officially signed. The contract that formalized what had been happening informally for weeks. Effective immediately, William said, Mandy holds final authority over all operational decisions during the transition period. This includes personnel changes, system modifications, vendor relationships, and infrastructure planning. Mark stared at the document like it was written in a language he didn't speak. That's not possible. I'm the COO. You're the interim CEO, Sarah clarified, and your authority is now subject to operational approval for any decision that affects system continuity. This is... Mark stopped, recalibrated. This is highly irregular. It's standard practice, William replied. When the acquiring company identifies that critical operations are dependent on specific individuals rather than documented processes. But I was fixing that, Mark said, his voice rising slightly. That's exactly what my restructuring was designed to address. Your restructuring, I said quietly, speaking for the first time, would have eliminated the people who actually know how the systems work. Mark turned to me. You can't be serious. You're going to override me? I'm going to protect what we built, I replied. I'm trying to improve what you built. No, I said calmly. You're trying to take credit for something you don't understand. The silence that followed was absolute. William cleared his throat. Mark, we need to discuss your role going forward. Mark straightened, grasping for familiar ground. Of course. I assume I'll continue as CEO, working with Mandy on operational matters. William exchanged a glance with Sarah. Actually, we're making a different arrangement. Mark's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, denial, understanding, panic. We're offering you a position in our operational training program, Sarah said. You'd be working directly with infrastructure teams, learning system management from the ground up. It's an excellent opportunity to develop the technical foundation that you're missing. You're demoting me, Mark interrupted. We're repositioning you, William corrected. Same compensation package for the first year. Different responsibilities. You'll be based at our Denver facility. They handle network operations for our Western region. Mark looked around the table, as if someone might suddenly defend him. Nobody spoke. He turned to me. You planned this. I met his eyes. No, I prepared for it. There's a difference. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. This is because I didn't include you in meetings. This is because you didn't understand what you were running, I replied, and you never thought to ask the people who did. William stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Mark, you will receive the formal offer by end of day. Take the weekend to consider it. Mark stood slowly, mechanically, like someone who'd just been told the rules of a game he thought he was winning. He walked out without looking at anyone. After he left, William turned to me. That was harder than necessary. It was necessary, I replied. Sarah smiled slightly. Welcome to the leadership team, Mandy. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of my old business cards. The title was outdated, irrelevant, almost embarrassing. I placed it on the table. I'll need new ones, I said. William picked it up, read it, and actually laughed. Yes, you will. The days after that meeting were strange, not because of dramatic changes, but because of the absence of drama. Things simply worked the way they were supposed to. Decisions got made by people who understood their consequences. Problems surfaced early and were resolved quietly. The constant background static of Mark's initiatives just stopped. I spent the first week doing what I'd always done, but with something I'd never had before. Actual authority to implement what I knew needed to happen. No more working around obstacles. No more documenting disasters I couldn't prevent. First priority? People. I met with every person Mark had tried to remove. Some were angry. Some were terrified. All of them needed to know whether they still had a future at Nexus. Your positions are secure, I told each of them. The institutional knowledge you carry matters. Horizon understands that now. Amelia, the engineer who'd asked me if we'd survive, actually cried in my office. I thought I was going to have to start over somewhere else. Not unless you want to, I said. But if you stay, I need you to document everything you know. We're going to build redundancy into the knowledge, not just the systems. Second priority? Vendors. I called each of the companies Mark had antagonized with his cost-cutting demands. I owned the situation directly. Mark was operating under time pressure and incomplete information, I explained, which was technically true. Our relationship with you is valued. Let's reset. 3 of them thanked me for calling personally. One asked, "Are you running things now?" I told him, "I'm making sure things run correctly." He laughed and said, "Good. That's what we needed to hear." Third priority, systems. We rolled back Mark's efficiency improvements that had introduced instability. We restored the backup protocols he'd called redundant. We reinstated the safety checks he'd labeled bureaucratic. By the end of the first week, our system reliability metrics had returned to normal. By the end of the second week, they exceeded our historical averages. Sarah called me on a Friday afternoon. William is impressed. We're just getting back to baseline, I replied. No, she said. You're demonstrating exactly what we bet on when we structured your role this way, which is that real leadership isn't about vision statements and restructuring charts. It's about understanding how things actually work and having the judgment to make them work better. I didn't have a response to that, so I just said thank you and ended the call. That evening, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Mark. I start in Denver on Monday. I've been thinking about what you said. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then replied, What part? That I didn't understand what I was running. You were right. I thought leadership meant having the authority to make changes. I didn't realize it meant understanding the consequences of those changes before you make them. I typed carefully. Denver will teach you that, if you're willing to learn. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I am. Thank you for not making this personal. It was never personal, I replied. It was always about the work. The dots appeared one more time, then stopped. No further response. I set my phone down and looked around my office. Same desk, same view, different feeling, like the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath for months. By the third week, the chaos had fully transformed into clarity. We could start to merge our systems without breaking what worked. They wanted to scale without sacrificing stability. We mapped dependencies. We identified single points of failure and built redundancy. We documented, we cross-trained staff. It was tedious, unglamorous work, never makes reports. But it was the work that mattered. One afternoon, William flew in unannounced and asked if he could walk the operations floor with me. No agenda, no formal review, just conversation. Most executives never actually see how their decisions propagate through the organization, he said as we walked past rows of workstations. They make pronouncements in conference rooms and assume the rest happens automatically. It doesn't, I said. No, he agreed. It requires people who understand causality, who can trace a decision through all its downstream effects. We stopped at a monitoring station where 2 engineers were reviewing system health dashboards. They didn't notice us immediately. They were deep in a technical discussion about load balancing algorithms. That, William said quietly, is what we're buying. Not the technology, the people who actually understand it. Later that week, Horizon made the announcement official. The acquisition was complete. Nexus Technologies was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Horizon Investments. The press release included the usual language about synergies and market positioning. Buried in the organizational chart was a new role, Chief Operations Officer, Nexus Division. My name appeared next to it. I didn't celebrate. I made lists, systems to optimize, people to develop, risks to mitigate. Because authority isn't about status, it's about responsibility. And responsibility means the work never actually ends. That night, Amelia sent me a message. Just saw the announcement. Congratulations. I replied, thank you. Now the real work starts. Hasn't it already been happening? That was stabilization. Now we build something better. She sent back a thumbs up emoji, then added, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're the one doing it. For what it's worth. Such a small phrase, but sometimes the small recognitions matter more than the grand pronouncements. The conference room where Mark had laughed at my business card was gone now. Horizon had renovated the executive floor, replacing the glass walls with something less transparent but more functional. Soundproofing, they said, so that strategic discussions didn't echo through the entire building. My office was smaller than Mark's had been. I'd requested that. Didn't need a corner view. I needed proximity to the operations floor. Needed to be able to walk out my door and directly into the space where actual work happened. Nexus had survived the acquisition. More than survived, really. Horizon's resources let us finally implement security features we'd been planning for years but couldn't afford. Their compliance team helped us expand into markets we'd previously considered too risky. Their engineering talent gave us fresh perspectives on problems we'd been solving the same way for too long. But the foundation remained ours. The systems I'd built, the relationships I'd maintained, the institutional knowledge I'd finally managed to document and distribute. One Wednesday afternoon, Sarah visited for a quarterly review. We walked through metrics, discussed challenges, reviewed the integration roadmap. At the end, she closed her laptop and said, "You know what's interesting?" "What?" 6 months ago, this company was valued at $1 million. Last week, our board revalued the division at $1.2 billion. I didn't respond immediately because I knew where this was going. "Want to know why?" she asked. "Stability and confidence. Our clients know the system works. Our team knows their roles matter. Our investors know we're not one departure away from collapse. That's just competent management, I said. It's rarer than you think, she replied. Most companies confuse activity with progress, motion with direction, leadership with titles. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mark called me last week. I looked up. How is he learning? Apparently, he's been working night shifts at the Denver Operations Center. Said it's the first time he's actually understood what happens when servers fail at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's good. He asked if there was a path back to executive leadership someday. What did you tell him? I told him to ask me again in 3 years, after he spent enough time in the infrastructure to understand what breaks and why. After she left, I sat at my desk and thought about career paths, how sometimes they look like clean upward lines on organizational charts, but the reality is messier, full of detours and setbacks, and moments where you have to choose between being right and being liked. I chose being right. It cost me meetings and visibility, and probably a few friends, but it kept the company stable. Life is challenging, and the future is often unknown. If you've been in a similar position where the new broom tries to erase you, what did you do? Did you want revenge, or were you responsible to the end, hoping for vindication? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my position. Do you believe in karma? Tell me your story. Subscribe to the channel for more workplace justice stories like this.